Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz bassist Michael Formanek. Born in San Francisco, he moved on to New York City's jazz scene in the 1980s, and he got busy working as a sideman with Freddie Hubbard, Joe Henderson, Dave Liebman, Fred Hersch, and Attila Zoller over his career. He's been quite a prolific session musician, and he's full of adventures and stories from Jazzland. His latest album is 2016's The Distance, and like all of his other recordings, he's busy getting it out there to the people, and the people dig it. So get to know him and dig this interview, my friends.
Hey, Michael, thank you for taking some time out. I appreciate it, man.
No problem.
And I'm going to go ahead and dive in here and ask you, what has been going on lately?
It's been pretty busy. The main thing in very recent history is that I just had a festival concert for my large ensemble Colossus. We just did a festival in Poland, so I had to get 19 people, including myself, to Poland and back.
Wow.
So that was kind of a bit of an undertaking.
Yeah.
For me, but it all went great. And then we finished that, I went to Helsinki and worked for a week with some of the students at the Sibelius Academy there, and then did a concert with an alumni band from the conservatory, so professional musicians playing some of my music, which was great. I think it went really well. So so that was kind of a busy couple of weeks. And then, I teach at the Peabody Conservatory, so I'm kind of finishing up my semester there. I have a couple things. I have a concert this weekend with the great cellist Hank Roberts and Ches Smith. We're going to do a trio concert in Baltimore on Saturday, and then I go up to New York to work on a recording project with Mary Halverson, with Ambrose Akinmasore and Amirtha Kadambi and Toma Fujiwara, which is happening. We're going to rehearse for a few days and then go and record that. Yeah, so it's kind of a lot of stuff going on, all good, but just keeping busy, I guess.
That's beautiful. Yeah, it must be refreshing to go to those parts of the world and to give those fans your music. How does it feel?
I mean, really, really good. This is a kind of a special. This festival in Poland is kind of a special place because it's a festival that's curated by Tomasz Stanko, the great trumpet player, and his daughter Anya kind of handles the booking, and it's mostly ECM related artists, not only, but pretty much a lot of artists who record on ECM. So it's kind of it's small. I mean, it's smaller, probably 1,000 people at the concert, but it's a smaller festival and has a really nice feeling, really relaxed. And the audiences, I just find the Polish audiences are very, very well informed, very intelligent, they really kind of know what's going on, and they seem really hungry for, different things and whatever. So the response was great. But it's always good to bring the music to someone to an audience that's really sort of receptive and kind of a little bit waiting for it. They seemed like they were sort of anxious to check this out. So yeah, it felt great.
Right on. Talk to me about your latest album, The Distance. How do you feel about it?
It's got a lot of my blood and guts poured into it. So I guess I feel it's very strongly connected to me somehow. In a lot of ways, so it's not a kind of hard thing to be too passive about. I feel strongly about it. I think it's a great band. I think we've had great performances, including the recording, but also live performances. But pretty much a pretty amazing group of musicians, really dynamic, interesting, intelligent, group of musicians. So that's been a blast, but the record I think came together really well. I think ECM did a great job in sort of getting it out there, and I think it represents. I mean, for me, The Distance kind of is the closest thing to an autobiography I'll probably ever write. It's got a lot of. I kind of feel like in a lot of ways it's the sum total of just many different things that I've been working on and listening to and thinking about for a lot of years. just putting together this group of musicians and to be able to structure it in a way that kind of maintains a certain kind of freedom, but still has a lot of subtlety and nuance and dynamic interest. And I feel very strongly about it. I mean, it as time passes, it's like I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to do other things. I've got some other things planned, but I think that for me that has definitely been an important recording.
Talk to me about your childhood growing up in San Francisco. That's such the melting pot of every possible culture and the arts. What was your childhood like? How did you get involved with music?
Yeah, no, it's funny. It's really true. I'll definitely comment on that. I mean, so for me, I mean, like most kids growing up in the 1960s, early 1970s, we all wanted to be rock and roll guitar players and whatever, pretty much, or some variation on that. And so I sort of had my little bit doing that and started playing electric bass because we had so many guitar players around. And so I just was not really particularly serious or hardworking about it, but I like to do, I like to play. And so somewhere in my high school years, I got interested in, I'd heard some jazz that was more, I played in high school big bands. I'd heard a number of different things, but I hadn't really heard musicians really improvising at a really high level and kind of stretching out and, that whole process. But fortunately, as you say, there were many different things going on in the Bay Area. I grew up in a place, kind of down on the coast, and there was just a little bit south of where I lived was a beach house where they had concerts every Sunday, a place it's still going, it's going again now, called the Box Dancing and Dynamite Society. And every Sunday they had these concerts, and it could be anyone. It could have been Bill Evans Trio, could have been the Don Ellis Big Band, it could be John Handy one week, and Bobby Hutcherson, who lived kind of right up the street from there. It was, pretty amazing place. Thad Jones and the Lewis Band, I mean, just on and on of great musicians. So I was kind of getting exposed to music. And then as things are often the case with me, by kind of a fluke, I met this saxophone player doing a high school concert, a guy named the Bishop Norman Williams. His name is Norman Williams. He's from Kansas City, actually. But he was the bishop because he was part of the original group of musicians that were involved with the Church of John Coltrane out there. It used to be called the One Mind Temple. And he was the bishop of the One Mind Temple, and he came down as a guest soloist with my high school big band. And we just kind of hit it off in this weird way. Like, we just had this one duo together. I was 15. I knew nothing at all about jazz, about anything, but somehow we improvised together. And he liked it, and he started calling me for gigs a little while after that. And so I was going up to San Francisco from my little coastal suburb and playing with all these guys, amazing musicians. I mean, guys, Woody Shaw was around. He would play. Eddie Henderson was around. He would play sometimes. Some really great local players. And it just kind of brought me into it in a way that just seemed like a natural thing to do. And as you say, the sort of melting pot there, this is, just a few years after, the big late 60s boom of Bay Area, bands, San Francisco bands, Oakland bands, the Grateful Dead, the Jefferson Airplane, the Marin County Sons of Champlin, Tower of Power, Sly Stone had been up there, Herbie Hancock was starting to there was all just a lot of stuff, Latin music. A few guys like Sonny Simmons, saxophone player, was living out there. I'd play sessions with him. Art Landy, the great pianist, improviser, I played with him. It was wide open. And so that was just kind of my intro to the music, was that you can kind of just go all these different directions, and everyone's got their different approaches and different things, funk, electric, loud, soft, just kind of everything. And, and that sort of gave me maybe the interest in listening to and trying to play a lot of different musical worlds and sound worlds. And, eventually then I went to New York and had to become sort of more specialized in different areas. But the Bay Area foundation, I think, was really important for me, and that became clear to me later on.
Sounds like you hit the ground running pretty quick, but were there really big albums on your radar that influenced you in the jazz world?
Back then?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was a great library in my town that for some reason they always seem, I don't know why, because it's still that way, they seem to have a really good jazz buyer or whoever would buy the recordings. And so I'd go in there and I would just grab everything in the jazz column that looked interesting. And at that time, it would be, Bitches Brew, Miles Davis Bitches Brew and Live Evil and those recordings, but also like Coltrane, they have like A Love Supreme and Ohm and Sunship and those records. And I remember having various degrees of success diving in on that level, but I would usually then try to find some of the little earlier recordings. So I would find, Coltrane Plays the Blues or Miles Smiles and things like that, and kind of, work my way back through that. So I think there were a lot. I mean, I remember when Coleman Science Fiction was huge for me. That was one of the biggies that I remember really specifically, when I was just really starting to play bass, trying to learn some of Charlie Hayden's parts off of Science Fiction, probably when I was 15 or 15 and a half, 16, whatever. So those were big. There were also great rock albums at the time. I had Allman Brothers Live at Fillmore East. I had all kinds of Hendrix and other stuff at the time. So I was still pretty into a pretty wide range of music. Anything else that really, I mean, at that point, yeah, it was really a mix of a lot of different stuff. I'd gotten my first art ensemble recordings. I'd gotten, just a big range of things. Some Ellington, my first taste of some Ellington, like, Far East Suite, some of those records that weren't that old then. Yeah, so I guess those for sure.
Right on. So once you really did start getting into music and started playing, was it kind of a foregone conclusion that you were going to become a professional musician, or were there other things that were going on with you?
I don't think I was quite prepared to really do anything else at that point. I mean, I guess I was a little bit of a lost teenager in that way, and I sort of found the music, and it kind of interested me. And I was like okay in school. I wasn't great in school. I wasn't. I got into a state university there that didn't have super high standards, and I mainly was already playing music, and it seemed like I was getting so much more like reinforcement or positive reinforcement, or for sort of playing music than anything else, and it just felt better to kind of be in some kind of around people where there was a there was an exchange of, I don't know, dialogue, and, whatever. I didn't just feel I was totally off on my own. So I think there was probably some need for a sense of community and just dealing with people, and also different kind of people, because I came from a, kind of an insular little town, on the coast that a lot of people stayed in. It's a really nice town called Pacifica, California. It's like a beach town, a lot of surfers, a lot of, whatever. And there's some great people I know from there, many that stayed there. But I didn't feel like I was kind of getting to know people, different people, different kinds of people, whatever. And that for me, that opened up, starting to play music kind of opened it up to a lot of different, personalities, different age. I was playing with a lot of older musicians. I was playing with a lot of, black musicians. I was playing a lot with some, Hispanic musicians at the time there. There was all kinds of stuff going on, and I liked that the fact that was all happening. And so doing the music as a living, I mean, I sort of started to play gigs, and by I mean, I guess that they paid very little, but I would always do that thing that sort of naive people do sometimes, and you just figure, wow, if I'm getting $50, I got $50 every day. Yeah, I could live, whatever. You don't realize that what I actually get a gig every day. But when I was that young, I probably was pretty stupid, and so it kind of seemed like it made sense. I was getting a little better gigs. Then I mean the thing that started to happen though is one is that I dropped out of school. I went to my college for a year, and I was doing all this other stuff, and it just didn't make sense at that point to be there, as I needed to just sort of be in San Francisco and just playing. And I started getting calls from people like Joe Henderson, who was living there, and Tony Williams was living there at the time. I was in his band. Orlandi, Eddie Henderson, different bands. The drummer Mike Clark and I are still very, very good friends. He kind of, right when he left Herbie Hancock's band in the 70s, I ended up doing all these things with him and kind of playing, a lot of different sort of fusion gigs and funk gigs and stuff with him. So it just seemed like the right place to be, and I don't think I was thinking forward so much that it's like, well, this is how I'm going to make a living. But at that moment, I was sort of able to put it together because life was relatively simple and relatively cheap out there. By the time I went to New York, I was pretty clear that that's really what I was going to do. But I say by the time before that, I don't think I was even thinking that much about it. I was just doing it.
Well, you were around so many great people, as you mentioned, Woody Shaw, Eddie Henderson. There were so many people. What did you learn from the pros at that early age? Not only about, you're going to absorb a lot about music, but you're also, as a human being, going to absorb a lot about being alive. What did you get from them?
Well, I think more than anything, I got that first of all, that they were human beings with all the human failings and all the things that other human beings have. It actually even clicked to me at that time that even some of the people I knew from records that I didn't know in person were also just human beings, and they so I kind of very early on I never adopted that sort of hero kind of worship or idolization that sometimes I see within musicians, where they don't even allow their influences to be human. They just want them to be whatever they want them to be. And I really felt, Joe Henderson was a really complicated dude. He was brilliant, but he was also kind of mysterious, and used to call him the Phantom. He would kind of disappear. He'd go somewhere to a gig, he'd sort of disappear, and you never knew where he was. And Tony Williams was like kind of, he had a real interesting sort of way of communicating. He could be very quiet, very kind of introverted, and didn't really, say a whole lot sometimes, but he loved to watch like Star Wars movies, and he had all these kind of things that he was into that were just really interesting personality types, and across the board, just really hardworking, really dedicated musicians. Tony was always studying composition all the time I was playing with him. Joe Henderson, was very, very intellectual, read a lot, spoke several languages. Dave Liebman came to town, kind of the same thing, just really hardworking, dedicated, always trying to improve themselves and their crafts. And then when it came to the gig, there was all this work that was done, but the gig itself wasn't any big deal. It was sort of just like an extension of everything else you do. You're working hard all the time. You're developing all the time, and you get to the gig, and it's not like we have to plan out everything to the finest detail. It's like, no, now it's time to play. And when it was time to play, you just played, and it wasn't, nobody was trying, at least at that time, nobody was trying to control anyone else. They may have wished like I played differently, or may have wished I was somebody else, but the fact of the matter is, nobody that I played with in those early years ever tried to make me do something other than what I was doing. And so to me, I was amazed in later years when I got around band leaders who were much more sort of controlling in that way and wanted to control what other people do, and just realized that I just really did not learn to play music that way. I learned, you do the homework, you learn music, you learn what you need to learn, you learn the book, you try to memorize the book you're playing, whatever it is, and then you just go play, and you just sort of accept it at that level for playing. And I think probably in the early years, most of the guys I worked with, that's what I really got from it.
So when you did finally migrate to New York City, what kind of cultural curve did you have to leave? What was it like in those early years for you?
It happened in sort of a funny way, or I guess a slightly unusual way. One is that my trip to the East Coast was not with the intention of moving, to New York. At least I didn't admit that at the time. It was more like I sort of said, well, I'm going to do this. I went to play to upstate New York, actually to Buffalo, to play Brazilian music with these guys that I met in San Francisco. And so it was a chance to kind of learn something about Brazilian music. And it was my way to get to the East Coast, so I could then kind of go check New York out and see if I liked it, and kind of a, not a non-committal way of getting to see if that was going to be something I might be interested in doing. So I went, spent the summer of '78 in Buffalo. Ended up the guy whose gig it was. By the end, he got kind of pushed out of the band for various reasons, and these other Brazilian musicians came up from New York, and including a very, very important Brazilian drummer named Henderson, who was one of the beginners, founders of sort of playing bossa nova on the drum set, creating sort of those styles in the 1960s. So I came to New York, and one of the things I did for my first year or two was playing with a lot of Brazilian musicians, and that was kind of an important thing. I mean, people now like Duduca de Fonseca, who, a lot of people know from the Brazilian groups that he plays in, and then the other thing was that I was playing with Dave Liebman because right when I came to New York, he had a gig at Sweet Basil in New York that he'd had a bass player who just canceled on him, and so he asked me to do that gig, and so I kind of had that introduction to New York. It was playing with Liebman, which was kind of a big deal because he had just moved back, and so I met a lot of people that way, and then the Brazilian connection. But after that, it was kind of all over the place for a few years. I was doing every possible kind of gig, trying to figure out how to make a living. I was playing, electric bass still, so I was doing some kind of, more pop-ish, fusion-ish related kind of gigs, and, some straight-ahead jazz gigs and some Brazilian gigs, and it was a bit all over the place. So those first few years for me, probably, 78 to 83 or 84 or so, were a bit like, just try to kind of throw everything at it and see what happens and try to keep busy and try to play and try to work. And then gradually I started to get a little more selective about what I wanted to do, and I kind of narrowed things down a bit more. So, but I managed. I mean, in those days you could kind of make a living. There were a lot of little $50 gigs around, and if you did enough of them, you could pay for a cheap apartment and eat pizza and rice and beans or whatever, and you could manage. I think it's harder now in a lot of ways. The gigs don't even often pay $50, and the just a whole lot more expensive to live there.
But when you look back on your life, you've dedicated your life to jazz. You've given everything you have to it. How do you feel about your career and your life in jazz? I mean, you've obviously had hardships, but everything seems to have worked out. You're traveling internationally. You have a lot going on. How do you feel now that you look back in the rearview mirror?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think it's given me a lot more than I've given it, to be honest. I mean, it was, I feel like whatever little contributions I may have made here and there, that's great. I feel good about it. I mean, I look back on the work I've done, and I'm proud of most of it and all that, and I'm really happy to have, I think that the thing is, for me, I have sort of an unusual connection too, because I played with so many of the guys in previous generations, and I played so much in kind of different areas of jazz, different sort of, whole different music scenes that aren't necessarily connected and related, and I feel like that's been for me a really positive. There were early on people would look at me like I was crazy, like, wow, you're playing these gigs here, why would you go play with those lunatics over there? Why would it's like just trying to figure it out. But now, in retrospect, it makes perfect sense. It was exactly what I needed to do. It's really exciting sometimes, too, to kind of meet younger musicians or teach younger musicians, and to be able to talk about, some of the music that maybe that I was involved in or that I got to witness firsthand, and to talk about it a little more, slightly more real and kind of non-romanticized way. And I think that's important for some of the musicians of my generation to be able to do that, and not just kind of just elevate everybody, put everybody up on pedestals and say, well, back in the day it was this and now it's that, but just try to really find a connection between the way people did things then, why the music came out, why the results are the way they were because of so many different factors. And the fact that all of the musicians virtually that we listened to in those years did not come from where people learn now in schools and in jazz programs and stuff, how to find a way to kind of connect all of those ideas. So that's I think that's a really important thing for me. So yeah, I've been extremely lucky. I gotta say, I've worked very hard, but I've been extremely lucky, and I've always been very good at recognizing opportunities when they've come along. And, probably made some dumb choices along the way, but definitely made some of the right ones. And I think it, kind of helped to facilitate all those things you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, the great thing about music, and I think more specifically jazz, is that it's a real evolutionary look into how things can grow over time. And as an organism, you hung out with some heavy hitters in the beginning. You were around a lot of big names. What is the health of jazz in 2016? How healthy of an organism is it? And in your evolutionary look over all the years that you've been in it, how has it advanced to where it's at now?
It's hard to look at it in total and say that it's all advanced. I mean, I think that as an art form, music that's informed by jazz and jazz practices and jazz music and music that's been sort of evolved from so a lot of the same processes. I think they're extremely healthy right now. I think it's kind of an amazing time when there's just an incredible group of musicians around playing at really, really high levels and able to kind of do anything and move just across all the sort of genre stylistic boundaries, with ease and play kind of in any sort of inside structures, outside of structures, in time, out of time, just like whatever, all those things that used to be thought of more as style, and now there's a fluidity about that with I think the really good players now who don't necessarily have to think, oh, now I'm playing my 1950s hard bop style, now I'm playing my Ornette Coleman style, now I'm playing, it's all much more fluid and kind of interrelated in a way, and I think that's great. And I think that's a really healthy thing for the music to be aware of the individual style and recordings and processes, but not to sort of get hung up in them either. So I think it can be too clever sometimes. I mean, you're dealing with a lot of people constantly trying to come up with their own thing or different forms, and sometimes we probably do, and I could say I'm guilty of this, I'm sure too, sometimes lose sense of some just basic, really good kind of good time, good feel, good melody, good, those things are always great. And I think sometimes we try a little too hard to mess with that, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but that just may be an observation that, like I say, I'm as guilty of as anyone else. I just think, unfortunately, we're at a point in time in history where people don't have a whole lot of patience to sit and listen to how things evolve naturally over time. They want to be hit over the head with things very quickly and sort of get it, in a quick second and move on to the next thing. And, I don't think that serves not only jazz music, but I don't think it serves a lot of great art, music, film, literature, other things so well, because those things do need to be absorbed over time a little bit more. I wish it wasn't the case that sometimes to be able to really connect with sort of more traditional jazz audiences, you kind of have to stay within a sort of almost something a little that I consider a little more formulaic, and if you're playing in a restaurant, it's going to be this. If it's a concert, it's going to be that. If it's, whatever, it's having to be, I guess we always have to be mindful of the environment we're playing in and all that, and being conscious of that. But I just think that left to its own devices, the music itself is growing very quickly, but it's kind of hard to keep that somehow working within the culture it should be a part of. And, so that's a challenge. As much as the musicians need to adapt and grow, the audiences also need to, and I think probably are to some extent.
And, looking back on the arc of your career, you've gotten a lot of awards and commissions and 5-star ratings and downbeat. So let me ask you this. I don't want to know your favorite award, but what award did you get that surprised you, that really kind of threw you off guard?
I mean, for sure, the first 5-star review in downbeat for the Rub and Spare Change. I had no idea that could even happen, So, just because my earlier recordings, the Enja recordings I did in the 90s, they were out there. Some people seem to know them or whatever, but they were pretty under the radar, I think, for the most part. And did okay, had good, some good responses, but it was something about that recording, and I think also the fact that I hadn't put anything out in quite a few years, and just that that I was basically sitting here in the conservatory in Baltimore and just working on music and teaching and doing all this stuff, and then I said, oh yeah, maybe I should do this again. So I put this group together and did this recording, and then ECM wanted to put it out, and it was just kind of this whole, like I kind of stumbled into it a little bit, and then to see that kind of result and the press that followed and everything, I think, I was pretty shocked about that, I got to say.
So, you've been around a lot of great jazz musicians. I'm sure you've seen a lot of shows. So let me ask you kind of a fantasy realm question here. And if you could get into a time machine and go back and see a show, who would you want to catch that you never did catch live?
Lester Young.
Right on. Surprise.
Yeah, no, I mean, no question. I mean, there's so many musicians. I mean, I wish I could have seen Duke live. I mean, there are many people, but something about it, if I could have just sat in a room with Lester, just sitting there playing, that probably would have been the end all be all for me,
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I could go down and make a list from there and go on and on for sure, because I was first thought, but of course, I would love to see Oscar Pettiford play. I would love to see, I never thought Paul Chambers, but there are a lot of people that I would love to see play. But something about Lester, that would have been really exciting.
Absolutely. So let me ask you a general question. Why do you love jazz?
Because jazz, at its best, is such a perfect intersection of intellect and emotion, understanding of and acceptance of different people's ideas. I mean, I know jazz in its earlier years, the music itself was more similar than it is now. Now it's more spread in different directions, but it seemed like within the music itself, there was a lot of acceptance of the individuals and the individuality of the musician. And to me, that's still one of the greatest things about it, is how each person, with their brains and their hearts and their hands and their concentration, all these things they use, that they learn to put something together, and then can find a way to maintain their individuality, be able to express all this stuff with other people in a context of playing with other people, and being able to find ways to make that work, I think is just an amazingly fascinating thing. It's a microcosm of how societies could probably be working a whole lot better. And it is, as many people point out, a very democratic process in a lot of ways at its best. But I think mostly, yes, that it just had a great ability to put together conscious thought, structure, ideas with a very emotional kind of connection, and be able to do that in real time and have it be different every time you do it through improvisation.
Right on. Of all the fans that you've played for over the years, is there a compliment or something that you received from a fan that really stands out?
There are kind of a lot of them, but I mean, I'm sort of getting in my mind the kind of like a compilation of a few different ones, but they tend to be more like that one person at a concert who just kind of comes up and expresses something about like an early recording, or about mostly, I guess, something what something's meant to them. I just recently got I've gotten a lot of actually really nice emails and things from people about the distance. That recording's been seems like very meaningful to a lot of people, and I just got something not too long ago from a guy, somebody that I actually know that's an art, that's very artistic, sort of makes furniture and stuff. But he was talking about how he had the CD playing in his loft in his studio with all these people kind of working for him, and how they've had it on, and how it's just been like this really important sort of thing to play, and that everybody's been just really responding to it and really being into it while they're working on this, making this furniture. But I don't know, I just thought that was so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you this. This is my final question, just to kind of get to the essence and the center of who you are. Everyone has a version of who you are, your family, your friends, the fans. But when you wake up and you face the world, who do you think you are?
I think I'm about 25 different people, and I have to figure out which one it is at any given time. I mean, that's, I got to say that's the nature of, I think, modern life, for one, but also as a modern musician who has, a performing career, teaching career, family, still have to deal with everyday mundane life, all these things. And so I think we are forced to, like most people, to wear a lot of different hats. And so, I try to wake up every day being the musician, being like having a clear head and sort of being able to put some thought into what I do. I tend to do my best work in the morning, for the most part, although it's, I don't always get to it as quickly as I'd like to, but if I am in a period where I'm able to work a lot, I like to get up in the morning, just have coffee, a little breakfast, and then sort of get right into it. And usually that first 3 hours or 4 hours of the day is the best day for me before everything starts to get mashed up into this big list of things that I'm not getting done and feeling bad about and stressing about and whatever, So yeah, I think it's that when I get up in the day, I'm like, I'm just a musician. I'm a simple person. I have, I just want to sort of, take some time, take a walk, think about what I'd like to do. And, so that's kind of how I get up, and I think of myself that way. And then it changes pretty drastically in the course of the day.
Sure, I understand that. Man, that's perfect. Thank you for opening up with me today. Thank you for the music and the stories. I appreciate it, man.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. I mean, they're great questions, and seems like you're really interested and did your homework and all that, which I guess that's all you can ask.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, San Francisco, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Michael for his music and his stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store, or visit Neon Jazz at YouTube.com. And for all things Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.